So I am excited because today we're finally getting to see the new circuit. For those of you who have followed the channel for years, you know that I started out with the Novation Circuit. So Novation sent one over, which is really nice of them, and we're of course going to open it up and we're going to check it out today together for the first time. So the new one is called CIRCUIT TRACKS, and if I'm not totally mistaken here, basically it's a Novation Circuit, but in a new form factor with actual sequencer tracks on it and audio inputs and a few other things that I'm sure that we will get into. So here it is. Wow. So right off the bat, it's a very different form factor from the old circuit. You can see here, huge difference in thickness. So the design is sleeker, feels more 2020, very nice actually. This is much more similar to their new launch pads that I've also reviewed here on the channel. The knobs are smooth, yeah, have a nice resistance to them. One thing with the original circuit was that the knobs could pretty easily be broken. I'm not sure if they've changed anything in regards to that. Oh wait, oh! So this is really cool. I think it has a built-in battery. I just turned it on. I can't see any slot for batteries. So yeah, I think they ditched the speakers though. So on the old one, you had a speaker here. I can't see anything. It doesn't make any sounds when I'm playing it. On the back here, we have some of the huge improvements. So we have USB-C, we have micro SD card for samples and projects and whatnot. We have actual full-sized MIDI and a MIDI through, which is super nice, no more dongles. Sync, we have left and right outputs as well as headphones, and we have inputs. So from what I can tell, this unit, it can't sample or anything. Use the input to input a signal through the effects, and you can also use the sidechain if I am not mistaken. So if we compare the new and the old one, you can see that we have a huge difference in I/O. In the box, there's also a USB cable, USB-C to Type A. There's also the power adapter, which is one of these USB power adapters. Next up, we're going to explore the CIRCUIT TRACKS together here, and I'm going to use the Pulsar 23 as well as the Minilogue, and focus a lot on how to use the circuit with external synths, because that's actually CIRCUIT TRACKS' biggest addition, the fact that you have two dedicated MIDI tracks and you have audio inputs that lets you route audio through the internal effects. But first we need to have a little bit of a recap, just a quickie for anybody who doesn't know what the circuit is, and then we'll talk about all the new exciting features. So chances are that you've seen the circuit before, probably here on this channel, but if you haven't, it could be good to know that it's a Groovebox. It has two synths. And those synths are the same on the original circuit as well as on the CIRCUIT TRACKS. So they share the same synth engine basically, and they sound the same. I also asked Novation about audio converters, and they are the same for both units. And you also have 4 sample tracks here. Drums 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they're basically sample tracks. You can load different samples into them. And there's no difference here between the old one and the new one. And the circuit lets you step record as well as live record. hand, you have these 8 knobs here that lets you change up the sound in various ways. And we also have a master filter, which can cut the bass or cut the high frequencies. The sound of the circuit is, how do you say, it's a little bit brittle, it's very digital, so not everybody loves the synth engines. I think it's totally fine for a Groovebox. I don't think it's like the best sounding synth ever, but it definitely gets the job done. It's also good to know that you can load different samples using components, which is Novation's software platform. The same goes for the synths. You can load different presets. Now let's get into the new stuff, because I guess that's why you are here. So one of the most significant changes between the original circuit and the circuit tracks is, of course, that they have taken all of the firmware updates and they've redesigned the unit to take this into account, which makes it a lot easier to use. It's actually quite a significant difference. For example, let me just show you here. So we have the drum patterns here. So let's create some new ones. So when we click drum 2, you can see that we have the step sequencer here. You can put down steps. And then we have the sounds. And this lets us create sample flips, basically locking samples to individual steps. So you can have multiple samples per track. So let's record something with these 2 snares. Let's move to drum 3. Or we could just place a trig like this, hold it down and select a sample like this. As you will note, the colors are different. So if I just place down a step like this, you see it's blue and it's pink if it's locked. So this is a good way to know that you've actually locked a sample to a different step. Another important change is the inclusion of a click track. So shift and click. So that's super useful and something that a lot of people wanted. They've also increased the pattern length to 32 steps, and we actually have a little button here. So we're here, that lets you increase the pattern length. So let's go into the kick drum here, for example, drum 1, and let's press this. So suddenly we can go into the additional 16 steps. We can just toggle between it. Another small but important thing is that the macro knobs are now labeled and the presets actually follow these labels. So it's a little easier knowing when I'm changing the filter frequency. And hopefully this creates a little bit of a standard that people can follow, because it's actually very handy to have a lot of presets that share a similar structure in terms of what the knobs actually do. Of course, there's differences depending on what kind of sound it is, but overall, it works really well, and I like this. Now for a Circuit 2, not a Mark II like this, but a Circuit 2, I would have loved to see like small screens that could change depending on what you actually have set up. And I'm just going to read here so don't mess the numbers up. You can actually now also load 128 presets per circuit pack, and you can also have twice the amount of projects per pack. So before it was 32, now it's 64 projects, and you can have a total of 32 packs stored on the SD card. So basically you can save a pack with presets and projects and samples, and then you can load it into the circuit without using a computer, it's a huge difference actually. And like I said earlier, there's a built-in battery. It's supposed to last up to 4 hours according to Novation. And we also have the external inputs, which lets you route audio through the circuit using the onboard effects as well as the sidechain and master filter. I also want to highlight that you can now sequence 2 external synths using the MIDI out and MIDI through using the 2 MIDI tracks, which is really handy. The 2 MIDI tracks also have dedicated controls for sending MIDI CC messages. And if you hit the MIDI track and preset, you can select from a number of presets for the MIDI tracks. So basically predetermined CC setups. So this is a little bit like a marriage between the Novation SL Mark III sequencer with its presets for hardware synths and the circuit workflow. It actually works very well, but more about this also. Well, not later, because now we've got to jump into it. These are the coolest new additions to the circuit, so let's talk about it. So here I'm sequencing the pulsar using the circuit tracks. So I'm basically using MIDI channel number 1 here. And since the pulsar has MIDI learn per sound, I'm using the notes view here, and I've programmed it to trigger the individual sounds. So you might have noticed that there's effects on some of the sounds, but not the kick. And that's because I'm routing the kick out through its own separate output into its separate input, because there's 2 mono inputs on the new circuit. So the kick is a dry sound coming from the pulsar, and the other 3 sounds are routed through a lot of effects. So here's a little loop I made. And all the audio that you're hearing is going from the pulsar through the circuit and then being recorded externally. And what's also going on here is that if we go into probability here, you can see that some of the notes have decreased probability of triggering. Meaning that when I increase here, it goes from basically like the lowest probability to trigger a step to 100%. And that's what makes it a little varied and interesting. And I also have some modulations set up here on the pulsar. So let's listen to it in context, okay? And also notice how everything's being routed through the master filter. So just a little jam that I improvised with the pulsar. And honestly, the MIDI tracks, they do make a lot of difference, because before you had to sacrifice one of the synth tracks in order to sequence something using the circuit. And I actually think that using the circuit to sequence external gear is one of the highlights. So just to show you how easy it is to use this MIDI track here to create a little drum groove with the pulsar, just go into patterns, select an empty pattern, click MIDI 1. So we've got the sounds. So now we can hold down a step. And let's say we want to vary it a bit. Let's put down a step, hit probability. We can duplicate this, hold down duplicate, press whatever you want to duplicate. We do the same again. We have this sound here. We set a lower probability and we can just duplicate it. And let's record some effects automation on top of this. Next up, I've hooked up the Minilogue, the original one, the Pulsar, and both are being controlled using the circuit tracks. Now, in order to make this work, we have the MIDI out here and the MIDI through. Now, the MIDI through, of course, works with the MIDI input as a normal through output works. However, if you hold down Shift when you start up the unit and press duplicate so it lights up, it basically mirrors the output of the MIDI output here. So the through becomes a second MIDI output. And then you just have to make sure that MIDI 1 here sends on one MIDI channel and MIDI 2 here sends on another MIDI channel. This is all detailed in the manual. But basically we have the Pulsar and we have the Minilogue. And when we go into the effects menu, we can of course apply effects individually to the two MIDI tracks. And this is possible because both are mono, so it's just one channel from each into the circuit. So this is what the Minilogue sounds like dry. Go into effects, press reverb. Let's increase it. Let's go back here. MIDI 2. Can add some delay. Now, one of the really great additions is of course the fact that we can now control external gear using CC messages. For each of the MIDI tracks here, we have these 8 encoders here that we can use to send MIDI CC. And there's a default setup, there's some default values, but you can also hit preset. And you can see here we have 8 different presets that we can pre-configure using components. So we can load any of these pre-configured CC message templates, if you will, and then use them to control external gear. Now, one difference that you might not think matters that much, but makes a huge difference in terms of workflow and is really a big improvement, is the fact that you don't need to use that many shift commands. Previously used shift and note to get the expanded view, now you can just toggle. So in one view here, we actually see the sequencer and some notes, and in the other we have more octaves to work with. And one of the new additions is that we can also sidechain whatever is going into the input. So by selecting MIDI 1, hitting Shift, the sidechain button, you can see now that this one here lights up blue. That's because we're in MIDI 1, and we have selected drum 1 to be the source of the sidechain. And let's see here, so here we can set the level of sidechain. So now when I press drum 1, you can see here that I put down a few trigs here, and you can't actually hear drum 1 because I lowered it in the mix. So it sounds like this. But we can't hear the percussions from the pulsar because it's being sidechained. So if we go into drum 1 again. And the reason, of course, that the kick isn't being affected is because the kick is actually coming in on a separate audio track. So we're only affecting the audio track, the first audio track here, not the second one where the kick is. We can sidechain the little bass as well. So that's actually very, very practical, having the ability to sidechain the input. Now, of course, the way I'm doing it here, I'm not sure if that's the way you would do it. You'd probably want to use this for, say, if you have a synthesizer doing a, I don't know, a bass line or something, and you want to sidechain it using the kick. But yeah, this is the way I have it set up. So what do I think about the Circuit Tracks? I won't take too long talking about this. I think it's pretty straightforward. This is a Circuit Mark II with some really good additional features, for example, MIDI tracks, audio inputs, and so on. It just expands on what the Circuit is. It's also a redesigned unit, so the workflow is a little bit different. It's much more accessible, it's easier to use, and to me, a lot more fun. And I think that's it. Is it worth selling your old circuits and getting this? Could be. If you're a really big fan of the circuit and if you really love the workflow, this is just a really good improvement. If you're expecting something totally different, then it's probably not the thing for you because it's still a circuit. However, if you like the idea of using the circuit as your main sequencer, you can't really go wrong with the Circuit Tracks. It's just so much better than the circuit for that purpose. And that's why I wanted to focus on it. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. And if you did, hit the thumbs up and have a great day.